Hey guys, tonight we drift into the peculiar world of 19th-century Parisian balloonists, where the skies above the city of light are alive with wicker baskets swaying beneath colorful silk orbs. Picture yourself standing in a creaking basket, the cool morning air brushing your cheeks as Paris sprawls below, rooftops glinting, the Seine snaking through, and chimney smoke curling like lazy ghosts. You're a balloonist, one of the daring or perhaps slightly unhinged souls who've taken to the clouds, chasing freedom or just a good story. But here's the kicker, you probably won't survive this without a few odd laws to keep you in check, because Paris, bless its bureaucratic heart, has opinions on how you should float. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Paris, sometime in the 1830s, and ballooning is the hottest thing since sliced baguettes. The city's buzzing with this new obsession, and you're right in the thick of it. You've just climbed into a balloon tethered in the Champ de Mars, a sprawling field where crowds gawk and vendors hawk lukewarm cider. The ropes groan as you adjust your weight, and the balloon tugs upward like an eager puppy. Your pilot, a wiry man with a mustache that could double as a broom, mutters about wind speeds while tying knots with the precision of a surgeon. You're not sure if he's licensed, but you're too busy marveling at the view to care. Below, Parisians in top hats and bonnets point skyward, their murmurs blending with the creak of your basket. This is no carnival ride, it's a cultural moment, a mix of science, spectacle, and sheer audacity. Ballooning started as a French obsession, and you're living its golden age. Back in 1783, the Montgolfier brothers sent a sheep, a duck, and a rooster skyward in a hot air balloon, proving animals could survive the trip. Historians still argue whether the duck was traumatized, but the point is, humans followed soon after. By the time you're floating in the 1830s, ballooning has gone from a royal experiment to a public craze. Parisians can't get enough of these aerostatic globes, and every park, plaza, and empty field is a potential launch site. You spot other balloons dotting the horizon, their bright reds and blues like floating lollipops. It's magical, sure, but also a logistical nightmare. The city's not exactly built for airborne traffic, and you're about to learn that the hard way. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early balloonists often carried champagne, not for celebration but to bribe angry farmers when they landed in their fields. You chuckle at the thought, imagining yourself waving a bottle at a pitchfork-wielding peasant. But don't laugh too hard, your balloon's drifting toward the city's edge, and Paris has rules for this. The mairie, that ever-churning machine of French bureaucracy, has started scribbling laws to tame the chaos. You're not just a free spirit up here, you're a potential menace to rooftops, livestock, and public order. The laws are odd, sometimes absurd, but they're the only thing keeping you from a fine or a night in a damp Parisian jail. As you float, you notice the crowd below thinning, their cheers fading into the wind's soft whistle. You're higher now, the city a patchwork of stone and smoke. Your pilot adjusts the burner, and a warm whoosh fills the balloon. You're not sure where you're headed, ballooning isn't exactly precise, but you're thrilled. The laws, though. They're already clipping your wings. You've heard whispers of fines for unlicensed pilots, bans on night flights, and even rules about what you're allowed to wear up here. It's Paris, so of course there's a dress code for floating. You glance at your pilot's frayed coat and wonder if he's breaking that one already. Let's talk about the vibe up here. The air's crisp, carrying the faint scent of coal fires from below. Your basket sways gently, like a cradle rocked by an invisible hand. It's peaceful, almost meditative, but there's a catch, the city's watching. Paris loves its balloonists, but it also loves control. You're not just drifting through the sky, you're drifting through a web of regulations that make no sense until you squint at them. Why does the city care so much? Because ballooning isn't just a hobby, it's a symbol of progress, a flex of French ingenuity, and a headache for anyone trying to keep the streets orderly. You lean over the basket's edge, peering at the tiny figures below. Somewhere down there, a clerk is drafting yet another law to make your life harder. Maybe it's about how many passengers you can carry, or whether you're allowed to drop leaflets from the sky. You smirk at the thought. Paris, the city of romance, fussing over your balloon like it's a runaway horse. But you're hooked. The freedom, the view, the sheer weirdness of it all, it's worth the hassle. Your pilot hands you a rope to steady the basket, and you grip it, feeling the rough hemp against your palms. This is your world now, laws and all. As you drift, you can't help but wonder, who's enforcing these rules? Is there a sky police, some grumpy officer in a tricorn hat scanning the clouds? Probably not, but the threat's real. You've heard stories of balloonists fined for landing in the wrong parish or spooking a nobleman's horse. The laws are new, untested, and often enforced with the enthusiasm of a bored tax collector. Historians still argue whether these early regulations were about safety or just Parisian officials flexing their pens. Either way, you're about to learn them the hard way. Your balloon catches a gust, and you sway, your stomach lurching just enough to remind you you're not on solid ground. The pilot grins, clearly used to this. "Hold tight," he says, and you do, because up here, there's no one to catch you but the wind, and maybe the law. You're not just a passenger, you're a pioneer in a city that's half in love with you and half ready to ground you. Welcome to the strange, soaring world of Parisian ballooning, where every flight is a dance with freedom and a tangle with bureaucracy. You're still drifting above Paris, the wicker basket creaking under your feet as the city's rooftops shimmer in the late morning light. The balloon sways gently, and you grip the ropes, feeling the tug of the wind like a mischievous child pulling you along. Your pilot, that mustachioed maestro of the skies, fiddles with the burner, sending a soft whoosh of heat into the silk orb above. You're deep in the 1830s now, and ballooning's not just a fad, it's a full-blown fever. But before you get too cozy with the view, let's rewind to how this madness started, because the origins of Parisian balloon mania are as wild as a barrel of caffeinated ferrets. Picture yourself back in 1783, decades before your current flight. You're not in a basket yet, you're standing in a muddy field outside Versailles, shoulder to shoulder with a crowd of powdered wigs and skeptical peasants. The Montgolfier brothers, Joseph and Etienne, are about to make history. They've built a massive hot air balloon, its patchwork silk gleaming like a giant's quilt. The mainstream fact here is undeniable. On September 19, 1783, they launched the first manned balloon flight. Well, manned by animals. A sheep, a duck, and a rooster float 1,000 feet up, tethered to the ground by a rope. The sheep munches grass before takeoff, oblivious to its role in science. The duck quacks, probably annoyed. The rooster? Let's just say it's not thrilled about the altitude. 8 minutes later, they land safely, proving the sky won't instantly kill you. You chuckle at the image. Imagine explaining that to your friends back home. But here's the quirky tidbit. The Montgolfiers thought hot air worked because smoke had magical, levitating powers. They burned wet straw and old shoes to create the smelliest lift possible, convinced the funk was the secret. You wrinkle your nose, thankful your current balloon doesn't reek of charred footwear. Historians still argue whether the brothers were geniuses or just lucky tinkerers who stumbled into fame. Either way, their stunt sparked a revolution. By the time you're floating in the 1830s, ballooning's gone from a royal spectacle to a Parisian obsession, and you're riding the wave. Let's set the scene. You're back in your basket, but imagine the early days of balloon mania. After the Montgolfiers, humans took the leap. In November 1783, Pilatre de Rogier and the Marquis d'Arlandes floated over Paris for 25 minutes, covering 5 miles. You picture them, 2 Frenchmen in frilly coats, waving at gobsmacked Parisians while trying not to set their wicker basket on fire. The crowd below loses its collective mind. Some cheer, some faint, a few probably bet on whether they'll crash. This wasn't just a flight, it was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, everyone in Paris wants to be a balloonist, or at least gawk at one. You can almost hear the vendors shouting, "Hot chestnuts! Get your balloon watching chestnuts!" Fast forward to the 1800s, and ballooning's exploded. You're in the thick of it now, and Paris is a circus of silk and hot air. Every weekend, fields like the Champ de Mars or Tuileries Gardens host launches, drawing thousands. You glance down from your basket, imagining the chaos of those early days. Top-hatted dandies arguing over wind speeds, women in hoop skirts dodging stray ropes, and kids chasing balloons like they're kites. The air smells of coal smoke and excitement, with a hint of spilled wine. But this isn't just fun and games. Ballooning's a science, a status symbol, and a headache for the city. Why the headache? Because Paris isn't ready for this. You're floating over a city of narrow streets, flammable rooftops, and zero air traffic control. Balloons don't exactly steer. You go where the wind takes you, which might be a nobleman's garden or a butcher's backyard. Early balloonists landed wherever gravity decided, often with a bump and a curse. You smirk, picturing yourself crashing into a pigsty, waving that champagne bottle you learned about last section to calm the farmer. But the cities had enough. By the 1830s, officials are scribbling laws to rein in the chaos, and you're about to feel their weight. Let's talk vibe. Up here, the world feels soft, almost dreamlike. The balloon's gentle sway is like a lullaby, and the distant hum of Paris, cartwheels, church bells, shouting vendors, fades into a soothing murmur. You lean over the basket's edge, watching shadows shift across the city's stone facades. It's peaceful, but there's a catch. Every flight's a gamble. The Montgolfiers proved you could float, but they didn't solve landing, navigation, or, frankly, common sense. You glance at your pilot, who's muttering about favorable currents. Is he a pro, or did he just borrow this balloon from his cousin? You're not sure, but you're hooked on the thrill. Back on the ground, ballooning's reshaping Paris. It's not just about flights, it's a cultural juggernaut. Artists paint balloons on everything from teacups to wallpaper. Poets write odes to the ethereal sphere. You roll your eyes at the melodrama, but you get it. There's something magical about defying gravity. The problem. Every Tom, Dick, and Jacques wants in. Amateur balloonists pop up like mushrooms, building rickety contraptions in their backyards. Some soar, others crash spectacularly. You picture a hapless tinkerer landing in the Seine, his balloon deflating like a sad soufflé. The city's response? Rules. Lots of them. These early laws are the seeds of what you'll face in the sky. They're not formal yet, just a patchwork of decrees from annoyed mayors and fussy prefects. You hear whispers of fines for reckless ascents, or bans on flying over churches. One rule even demands balloonists carry a lantern, which sounds cute until you realize it's to avoid setting Paris on fire. You laugh softly. Paris, the city of light, literally worried about your spark. But these rules are just the start. As you drift, you feel the weight of bureaucracy creeping in, ready to ground your high-flying dreams. Your balloon catches a breeze, and you tilt, the basket groaning like an old chair. Your pilot adjusts the burner, and a warm glow lights his face. You're still free up here, but not for long. The city's watching, and its pen is mightier than your silk. You glance at the horizon, where another balloon bobs like a distant cousin. Are they following the rules? Are you? You're not sure, but the thrill of floating keeps you grinning. For now, you're a speck in the Parisian sky, untethered but not unnoticed. You're still swaying in your wicker basket, the cool Parisian breeze tugging at your coat as the city unfurls below like a gray-green quilt. The balloon's silk canopy hums above you, taut with hot air, and your pilot, that mustachioed sky captain, squints at the horizon, muttering about crosswinds. You're in the 1830s, deep in Paris's ballooning craze, and the thrill of floating is starting to feel like a dance with chaos. Remember that champagne bottle you were ready to wave at angry farmers? Keep it handy, because the city's not just cheering you on anymore, it's slapping rules on your high-flying antics. Let's dive into the first quirky regulations that tried to tame balloonists like you, because Paris, with its love for order, couldn't let you drift without a leash. The mainstream fact is straightforward. By the early 1830s, Paris's municipal council issued its first formal ballooning ordinances, driven by a mix of public safety and bruised egos. You're not surprised. Paris loves its paperwork as much as its croissants. These laws weren't a full rulebook yet, just a handful of decrees to stop balloonists from turning the city into a free-for-all piñata. Picture yourself landing in a council meeting instead of a field. You're facing a room of dour officials in stiff collars, their quills scratching like judgmental crickets. They're fed up with balloons crashing into markets or spooking horses, and they've got a list of complaints longer than the Seine. Your job. Convince them you're not a menace. Good luck. Here's the quirky tidbit. One of the earliest rules banned balloonists from unnecessary shouting during flights. Apparently, some pilots thought yelling at pedestrians below was part of the fun, like a sky-born town crier with a megaphone. You chuckle, imagining yourself hollering, "Nice hat, monsieur," to a startled baker. The law wasn't just about noise, it was about dignity. Paris wanted its balloonists to be graceful, not circus clowns. Historians still argue whether this rule was enforced or just a grumpy official's pet peeve, but it set the tone. The city was watching your every move, even your vocal cords. Let's set the scene. You're floating over the Latin Quarter now, its crooked streets packed with students and cafes. The air smells faintly of bread and river water, and the balloon's gentle sway feels like a rocking chair in the clouds. Below, a crowd gathers, pointing at your balloon like it's a comet. You wave, feeling like a minor celebrity, but your pilot nudges you. "Keep it down," he says, nodding at the imaginary rulebook. No shouting, no theatrics, just float and behave. You roll your eyes. Behave. Up here, where the world feels infinite. Paris clearly doesn't get the vibe. These early laws were less about safety and more about control. One rule demanded balloonists announce their launches in advance, like sending an RSVP to the sky. You picture yourself pinning a note to a tavern door, "Jean-Pierre, ascending Tuesday, weather permitting." The idea was to warn the city, but it also let officials keep tabs on you. Another decree banned flights during public disturbances, which in revolutionary Paris could mean anything from a riot to a particularly rowdy market day. You smirk, imagine grounding your balloon because someone's arguing over turnips. But the city was serious. Balloons were symbols of progress, but also headaches for anyone trying to keep the peace. Let's talk sensory details. The basket creaks as you shift your weight, and the burner's soft whoosh sends a warm glow across your face. You glance down, spotting a horse-drawn omnibus trundling along the boulevard. The horses don't care about your balloon, but their driver might, especially if you drift too low. One early law fined balloonists for flying under 500 feet over populated areas. Why? Because low-flying balloons spooked livestock and distracted coachmen. You laugh softly, picturing a cow stampede caused by your shadow. Paris, ever practical, wanted its skies orderly, even if it meant measuring your altitude with a ruler. These rules weren't just about the city's streets, they were about its ego. Ballooning was France's pride, a flex of scientific prowess, but it also exposed Paris's quirks. You're not just a balloonist, you're a test case for how the city balances freedom and fussiness. The shouting ban, for instance, wasn't just about noise, it was about class. Wealthy Parisians, the ones bankrolling these flights, didn't want their sky adventures associated with rabble-rousing. You glance at your pilot's frayed coat and wonder if he's breaking another unspoken rule, looking too scruffy for the clouds. As you drift, you notice another balloon in the distance, its red silk catching the sun like a floating cherry. Are they following the rules? Probably not. You've heard stories of balloonists dodging decrees by launching from secret fields or bribing local officials with, "Yep, that champagne you're still clutching." The laws are new, and enforcement's spotty. You picture a lone constable on a rooftop, shaking his fist at the sky. It's comical, but it's also a sign of things to come. Paris is tightening its grip, and you're caught in the middle. The vibe up here is still magical, though. The wind hums past your ears, carrying the faint jingle of bells from a church below. Your balloon feels like a cocoon, shielding you from the city's chaos. But the rules are creeping in, like a fog you can't outrun. You lean over the basket, watching Paris shrink into a mosaic of stone and smoke. The laws may be odd, but they're part of the adventure. Your pilot adjusts the burner, and the balloon climbs, the air growing sharper. You're free for now, but the city's pen is always scribbling. You're still gliding over Paris, the wicker basket swaying like a hammock in the sky. The city below is a patchwork of slate roofs and bustling streets, with the faint clatter of horse hooves rising on the breeze. Your pilot, that mustachioed navigator with a knack for muttering, tweaks the burner, sending a warm whoosh into the balloon's silk belly. You're in the 1830s, and ballooning's not just a thrill, it's a bureaucratic battlefield. Remember that no shouting rule from last time? That was just the appetizer. Now, you're about to wrestle with one of the quirkiest laws yet. Paris's attempt to license balloon pilots like they're tavern keepers or carriage drivers. Buckle up, or rather, hold the ropes, because this is where the city's love for paperwork gets downright comical. Let's start with a mainstream fact. By the mid-1830s, Paris introduced a licensing system for balloon pilots, one of the first attempts to regulate who could legally float above the city. This wasn't just a formality, it was a power move. The municipal council, tired of amateur balloonists crashing into chimneys or drifting into Versailles, decided you needed a permit to play Icarus. Picture yourself standing in a stuffy office at the Hôtel de Ville, clutching a stack of papers while a clerk with a monocle grills you on wind patterns. You're not just a dreamer anymore, you're a candidate for the world's oddest driver's license. Here's the quirky tidbit. To get this license, you had to prove moral character alongside basic ballooning skills. Moral character? In a city where half the balloonists were showmen or borderline con artists. You snicker, imagining yourself swearing an oath to not use your balloon for smuggling or serenading strangers from the sky. The rule was less about ethics and more about weeding out riffraff. Paris wanted its balloonists to be respectable, not ragtag adventurers. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine safety measure or just a way to favor wealthy hobbyists over scrappy upstarts. Either way, you're about to navigate this bureaucratic maze. Set the scene. You're floating over the Isle de la Cité now, Notre Dame spires poking up like stone fingers. The air's crisp, with a hint of wood smoke from the city's hearths. Your pilot hands you a rope to steady the basket, and you grip it, feeling the rough hemp bite your palms. He's got a license, supposedly, but you're not sure how he earned it. Was it a test of knot tying or a promise to not crash into the Louvre? You're curious, because the licensing process was as bizarre as it sounds. You picture a testing ground in a muddy field, where hopefuls inflate balloons under the watchful eye of a city official. Maybe they had to hover 50 feet up, then land without breaking a single egg in a basket. You laugh softly. Paris would totally make you carry eggs just to prove a point. The licensing law wasn't just about skills, it was about control. To get a permit, you needed to show you could handle a balloon's burner, ropes, and ballast bags. Basic stuff, sure, but tricky when the wind's got its own agenda. You also had to submit a flight plan, which is hilarious when you think about it. Balloons don't steer, they drift. Your plan might as well be, go where the breeze takes me. Probably not into Belgium. But Paris didn't care. The city wanted your name, your balloon's dimensions, and a vague promise not to cause chaos. You smirk, picturing yourself scribbling, "I'll try not to land in a bakery," on the form. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's canopy ripples above you, catching the sun like a giant sail. The burner's heat warms your face, and the basket creaks with every shift of your weight. Below, Paris hums, street vendors hawk oysters, a distant accordion wheezes, and pigeons scatter from a plaza. You're free up here, but the licensing law looms like a grumpy parent. Without that permit, you're grounded, or worse, fined. The fines weren't cheap, think a month's wages for a shop clerk. You glance at your pilot, wondering if he's got his papers in order, or if he's banking on charm and that champagne bottle you're still clutching from earlier flights. The moral character clause is where things get really weird. You had to provide references, like you're applying to be a schoolteacher, not a sky wanderer. Imagine rounding up your baker, your tailor, and maybe a priest to vouch for you. Yes, Pierre's a fine fellow, never steals apples, probably won't crash into a cathedral. The rule favored the elite. Wealthy Parisians with connections could breeze through, while working-class balloonists, often the most daring, got stuck in red tape. You feel a pang of sympathy for those scrappy pilots, building balloons in their sheds only to be told they're not upstanding enough for the clouds. The vibe up here is still intoxicating, though. The wind hums past your ears, carrying the faint scent of river water and fresh bread. Your balloon feels like a floating island, untethered from the city's fuss. But the licensing law is a reminder. Paris owns the sky, too. You lean over the basket, watching the city's shadows stretch across cobblestone streets. Somewhere down there, a clerk's stamping permits, deciding who gets to soar. Your pilot nudges you, pointing at a flock of birds veering past. They don't need licenses, he jokes, and you laugh, but there's truth in it. The birds are free, you're tethered to bureaucracy. As you drift, you spot another balloon on the horizon, its yellow silk glowing like a second sun. Is that pilot licensed, or are they a rebel dodging the rules? You're not sure, but you're starting to see the pattern. Every law, from shouting bans to moral character checks, is Paris's way of taming the untamable. Ballooning's a dream, but it's also a fight, against wind, gravity, and the city's endless quills. You grip the ropes tighter, feeling the balloon's gentle tug. For now, you're aloft, but the ground's always waiting. You're still floating above Paris, the balloon's wicker basket creaking as it sways in the gentle wind. The city below glows in the late afternoon light, its rooftops a mosaic of slate and chimney smoke. Your pilot, with his ever-present mustache and knack for cryptic grumbling, adjusts the burner, sending a soft whoosh of heat into the silk canopy. You're deep in the 1830s, where ballooning is both a dream and a bureaucratic tug-of-war. Remember that licensing nonsense from last time, with its moral character clauses and egg-carrying fantasies? Well, hold on to your ropes, because Paris has another quirky rule up its sleeve: no ballooning after dark. Let's dive into why night flights got the city's knickers in a twist and sparked debates that were equal parts practical and absurd. The mainstream fact is clear: by the late 1830s, Paris banned balloon flights after sunset, citing safety concerns and public order. Night flights were rare but not unheard of. Early balloonists, eager to push boundaries, sometimes launched under moonlight for the sheer romance of it. Picture yourself in a basket at dusk, the city's gas lamps flickering like fireflies below. Sounds magical, right? But Paris wasn't having it. The municipal council, ever the killjoy, saw night flights as a recipe for disaster. Crashes, fires, or just general chaos. You can almost hear the officials muttering, "These sky hippies need to be stopped." Here's the quirky tidbit: the ban wasn't just about safety, it was partly because night flights freaked out superstitious Parisians. Some thought balloons glowing in the dark were omens or even ghosts. You chuckle, imagining a baker crossing himself as your balloon's burner casts an eerie orange glow over his rooftop. Historians still argue whether the ban was driven by hard data on crashes or just the city caving to public paranoia. Either way, you're about to learn why drifting under the stars was a legal no-go. Set the scene. You're floating over Montmartre now, the hill's windmills spinning lazily in the fading light. The air's cooler, carrying the scent of damp stone and distant lavender from someone's garden. Your pilot hands you a rope to steady the basket, and you grip it, feeling the hemp's rough bite. He's muttering about the sunset, probably aware that landing before dark is non-negotiable. You glance at the horizon, where the sky's turning a deep indigo. A night flight sounds tempting. Paris under a blanket of stars, its chaos softened by darkness. But the law's clear: if you're still up here after twilight, you're breaking it. The night flight ban came from a mix of real and imagined problems. Let's start with the practical. Balloons rely on burners, which are basically controlled fires. At night, a stray spark could ignite a thatched roof or a haystack, and Paris, with its flammable wooden buildings, wasn't taking chances. You picture yourself drifting low, the burner's glow lighting up a street. One wrong move, and you're the guy who set a tavern ablaze. The city also worried about navigation. Without daylight, you can't see landmarks, and balloons don't exactly have GPS. You smirk, imagining your pilot squinting at the stars like a pirate with a sextant, muttering, "That's definitely the Eiffel Tower. Wait, no, that's a cloud." Then there's the public panic angle. Paris in the 1830s was modern but still superstitious. Gas lamps were new, and the countryside around the city was steeped in folklore. A glowing balloon at night? To some, it was a flying demon or a lost soul. You laugh softly, picturing a farmer hurling turnips at your basket, convinced you're a ghost. The city's officials, keen to avoid mob hysteria, used these fears to justify the ban. One report even claimed a night flight caused a stampede of goats in a suburb. True or not, it was enough to make the council slam the brakes. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's canopy hums above you, its silk catching the last rays of sun like a giant peach. The basket sways, and the burner's heat warms your cheeks, a cozy contrast to the chilly air. Below, Paris is winding down. Street vendors pack up, a lone violinist plays in a courtyard, and the Seine reflects the first stars. You're tempted to stay up here, to see the city transform into a sea of twinkling lights. But the law's lurking, and you've heard the fines are steep, enough to buy a new balloon, or at least a fancy hat to wear while you're grounded. The ban wasn't just enforced with fines, it came with social stigma. Night flyers were seen as reckless show-offs, the kind of balloonists who'd shout from the sky despite that other rule you laughed about earlier. You glance at your pilot, wondering if he's ever been tempted to break this one. He catches your look and shrugs. Stars are nice, but jail's not, he says, and you grin. The law's a buzzkill, but it's also a reminder. Paris loves its balloonists, but only if they play by the rules. The vibe up here is still dreamy, though. The wind hums, carrying the faint jingle of a church bell. Your balloon feels like a floating cocoon, shielding you from the city's fuss. You lean over the basket, watching shadows swallow the streets. Somewhere down there, officials are patrolling, ready to spot any rogue burners in the dark. You spot another balloon in the distance, its green silk fading into the dusk. Are they racing to land before the ban kicks in? You're not sure, but you're starting to feel the weight of these laws, each one a thread tying your balloon to the ground. You're still drifting in your creaky wicker basket, the Parisian skyline stretching below like a painting smudged with chimney smoke. The balloon sways, tugged by a playful breeze, and your pilot, that mustachioed maestro of muttered complaints, fiddles with the burner, sending a warm whoosh into the silk canopy. It's the 1830s, and you're caught in the whirlwind of balloon mania, where every flight feels like a rebellion against gravity, and a tussle with Paris's growing rulebook. Remember that night flight ban, with its mix of fire fears and ghostly goats? Now, let's shift to the chaos below your balloon, because when you land, the crowds and commotion on the ground turn Paris into a circus. You're about to see why these landings sparked laws as odd as a three-legged poodle. The mainstream fact is solid. By the late 1830s, Paris issued regulations to manage the mayhem caused by balloon landings, which often drew unruly crowds and disrupted daily life. Landings weren't just a logistical issue, they were public spectacles. Picture yourself descending into a field, or worse, a city square, while hundreds of Parisians swarm like ants to a picnic. The municipal council, fed up with trampled crops, spooked horses, and general pandemonium, started cracking down. You're not just a balloonist anymore, you're a one-person riot waiting to happen. Here's the quirky tidbit. One early law required balloonists to carry a landing flag to signal their descent, supposedly to warn crowds and farmers. A flag in a balloon that's already a giant floating billboard? You snicker, imagining yourself waving a tiny red cloth like a matador taunting a mob. Historians still argue whether this rule was practical or just Paris's way of making balloonists look faintly ridiculous. Either way, you're about to navigate the madness of touching down in a city that's half in love with you and half ready to fine you. Set the scene. You're floating over the outskirts of Paris now, where the city's stone gives way to patchy fields and orchards. The air smells of damp earth and distant hay, and the basket creaks as you shift to peer below. Your pilot's scanning for a landing spot, muttering about soft ground and no cows. The burner's glow lights his face, and you grip the ropes, bracing for what's coming. Landings are tricky, you don't steer a balloon, you just hope the wind's in a good mood. Below, you spot a crowd already gathering, drawn by your balloon's bright blue silk. They're pointing, shouting, and probably betting on whether you'll crash into a tree. You wave that champagne bottle from earlier flights, ready to bribe anyone who looks pitchfork happy. The chaos of landings was a real problem. Balloons didn't have designated landing strips, you touched down wherever gravity decided, often in someone's backyard or a village green. You picture yourself plummeting into a cabbage patch, the farmer shaking his fist while kids cheer. Crowds could number in the hundreds, especially if you landed near Paris. They weren't just curious, they were rowdy. You've heard stories of spectators trampling crops, stealing ropes as souvenirs, or even trying to climb into the basket before it stopped moving. One landing in 1836 reportedly sparked a fistfight over who got to touch the balloon first. You laugh softly. Paris, the city of romance, reduced to brawling over silk. The landing flag rule was Paris's attempt to bring order. The idea was simple: wave a flag as you descend to alert people to clear a path. But balloons move fast, and flags are small. You imagine yourself flapping a cloth while your pilot yells, "Get out of the way!" to a sea of top hats and bonnets. The rule also required you to land at a safe distance from buildings and livestock, which sounds reasonable until you remember you can't control where the wind takes you. You smirk, picturing a clerk with a ruler measuring how close you got to a barn. The fines for bad landings weren't cheap. Think a week's wages for a tailor, or enough to buy a fancy new flag to wave next time. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's canopy hums above, its silk rippling like a lake in the breeze. The burner's heat warms your hands, and the air carries the faint whiff of apples from an orchard below. As you descend, the crowd's noise grows: shouts, laughter, the occasional dog bark. You spot a gaggle of kids chasing your shadow, their boots kicking up dust. The basket tilts, and your stomach lurches as the ground rushes closer. You're not scared, but you're definitely awake. Landing's a gamble, and the crowd's not making it easier. The vibe on the ground is electric, but messy. You touch down in a field, the basket thudding against the earth. Before you can blink, people swarm: farmers, shopkeepers, even a priest in a flapping cassock. They're asking questions, touching the ropes, and eyeing your balloon like it's a fallen star. Your pilot's shouting about the flag rule, but no one cares. You pull out that champagne bottle, offering a toast to calm the mood. It works, sort of. A farmer grumbles about his flattened wheat, but he takes a sip. Paris's landing laws are supposed to keep this under control, but you're starting to see why they're a work in progress. You glance at your pilot, who's already planning the next flight. "Crowds are worse than the wind," he jokes, and you nod. The laws, flags, distance rules, fines, are Paris's way of taming the untamable. You spot another balloon landing in the distance, its yellow silk sinking into a meadow. The crowd's already running toward it, a human tide. Are they waving flags? Probably not. You're in a city that loves its balloons but dreads the chaos they bring. For now, you're back on solid ground, but the sky's still calling. Section 7. You're back in the air, the wicker basket groaning under your feet as the balloon drifts over Paris's patchwork of fields and spires. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows, and the air carries a hint of wood smoke and fresh hay. Your pilot, still sporting that mustache like it's his personal flag, tweaks the burner, sending a warm whoosh into the silk canopy above. You're in the 1830s, where ballooning's a wild ride tangled in Paris's ever-growing web of rules. Remember that chaotic landing scene, with crowds swarming and that silly flag you were supposed to wave? Now, let's talk about what happens when you ignore the wind and drift where you shouldn't. Paris has a law for that, and it comes with fines that'll make you wish you'd stayed grounded. Get ready to face the penalties for reckless ballooning. The mainstream fact is clear: by the late 1830s, Paris imposed fines on balloonists who drifted recklessly over restricted areas or failed to account for wind patterns. This wasn't just about bad parking, it was about protecting the city from wayward balloons crashing into markets, churches, or noblemen's estates. Picture yourself hauled before a magistrate, your balloon tethered outside like a naughty horse, while a clerk reads out your crimes: drifted over the Tuileries, spooked a baron's poodle. The fines were steep, and the city wasn't shy about collecting. You're not just a sky poet now, you're a potential scofflaw with a bill to pay. Here's the quirky tidbit: some fines were based on how many complaints your drift caused, not just the damage. If your balloon's shadow scared a flock of chickens or annoyed a grumpy countess, you could be slapped with a penalty. You chuckle, imagining yourself pleading, "But the wind did it," to a stone-faced official. Historians still argue whether these complaint-driven fines were fair or just a way for Parisians to vent their balloon-related grudges. Either way, you're about to learn why reading the wind is as crucial as reading the rulebook. Set the scene. You're floating over the Faubourg Saint-Germain, where aristocrats' mansions gleam with ivy and arrogance. The air's crisp, with a faint whiff of roses from private gardens below. Your pilot's scanning the horizon, muttering about unfavorable gusts. You grip the ropes, feeling the basket sway as a sudden breeze nudges you sideways. Below, you spot a grand estate with manicured lawns and a peacock strutting like it owns the place. You're drifting lower than you'd like, and your pilot's not thrilled. "We're too close," he grumbles, eyeing the estate's chimneys. You know the law. Drifting over restricted areas, like noblemen's properties or royal gardens, can land you in hot water. And by hot water, I mean a fine that could buy a new balloon or at least a peacock of your own. The reckless drift law was Paris's attempt to make balloonists think before they floated. Balloons don't steer, but you're expected to plan your launch based on wind patterns. You picture yourself studying a weather vane like it's a crystal ball, trying to guess where the breeze might dump you. The city's rulebook listed no-go zones, royal palaces, military barracks, and sensitive estates owned by people with enough clout to complain loudly. Drifting over these could cost you 50 to 200 francs, depending on the offense. You smirk, imagining a nobleman shaking his fist at your balloon, his wig slipping in the fury. But the complaint system was the real kicker. If enough locals reported your drift, say, a dozen shopkeepers claiming you spooked their customers, you'd be fined even if nothing broke. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, catching the sun like a golden sail. The burner's heat warms your face, and the basket creaks with every gust. Below, Paris is alive. Carriages rattle, a street singer warbles off-key, and a dog yaps at your shadow. You're drifting toward that estate now, the peacock glaring up like it's ready to file a complaint itself. Your pilot tosses out a sandbag, and the balloon jerks upward, narrowly missing a tree. You're safe, but the law's not so forgiving. If you'd floated lower, you'd be facing a fine for endangering public tranquility. You laugh softly. Only Paris would call a balloon drift a threat to tranquility. The complaint-driven fines were a bureaucratic nightmare. You imagine a tavern full of Parisians, griping over wine about your balloon blocking their view of the sunset. Each complaint added to your fine, like a tax on bad luck. Some balloonists fought back, arguing the wind was to blame, not them. You picture yourself in a cramped office, waving that champagne bottle from earlier flights to charm the clerk. "The breeze, monsieur, it's a scoundrel." But the city didn't care. The law was about accountability, or, more likely, revenue. Ballooning was expensive, and fines helped fill Paris's coffers. The vibe up here is still thrilling, though. The wind hums past your ears, carrying the faint scent of lilacs from the estate below. Your balloon feels like a rebellious bird, dodging the city's rules. You lean over the basket, watching the mansion shrink as you climb higher. Somewhere down there, a noble's drafting a complaint, but you're too high to care. Your pilot grins, clearly used to skirting the edges of the law. "Wind's not our friend today," he jokes, and you nod. The law's a chain, but the sky's still yours, for now. You spot another balloon in the distance, its red silk bobbing over a vineyard. Are they drifting legally, or are they tempting fate like you? You're not sure, but you're starting to feel the law's weight. Every gust is a gamble, every drift a potential fine. You grip the ropes tighter, the hemp rough against your palms. Paris loves its balloons, but it loves control more. For now, you're aloft, dodging estates and complaints, but the ground's always waiting with a bill. You're still aloft in your wicker basket, the balloon drifting lazily over Paris as the sun dips low, painting the city in hues of amber and rose. The air's cool, with a faint tang of river water and blooming jasmine from gardens below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky whisperer, adjusts the burner with a soft whoosh, keeping the silk canopy taut above you. It's the 1830s, and you're tangled in the quirky web of Parisian ballooning laws. Those fines for reckless drifts and complaints about spooked peacocks are still fresh in your mind. But now, let's shift to a new twist. Women balloonists, who soared through the skies and thumbed their noses at gendered rules designed to keep them grounded. Get ready to meet the daring ladies who made Paris rethink its skyward patriarchy. The mainstream fact is undeniable. By the 1830s, women like Sophie Blanchard and Elizabeth Theobald were ballooning over Paris, defying laws and social norms that tried to restrict female pilots. Ballooning was seen as a man's game, too dangerous, too technical, or just too improper for women in hoop skirts. But these pioneers didn't care. They launched, performed, and sometimes outshone their male counterparts, forcing the city to grudgingly adapt its regulations. Picture yourself watching a woman in a velvet cape climb into a basket, her cool confidence silencing the muttering crowd below. You're not just a passenger now, you're a witness to history's unsung heroines. Here's the quirky tidbit. One early law required female balloonists to have a male chaperone in the basket, supposedly for safety but really to enforce propriety. A chaperone? In a balloon where every ounce matters? You chuckle, imagining a stern uncle in a top hat, clutching the ropes and muttering about decorum while the wind laughs. Historians still argue whether this rule was about protecting women or just controlling them, but the women balloonists found ways to dodge it, proving the sky didn't care about gender. You're about to meet these trailblazers and see how they rewrote the rules. Set the scene. You're floating over the Champ de Mars, where a crowd buzzes like bees around a launch site. The air smells of trampled grass and warm cider from nearby vendors. Your pilot points to another balloon rising nearby, its crimson silk glowing like a ruby. "That's Madame Du Bois," he says, nodding at a woman in the distant basket, her scarf fluttering like a flag. She's alone, no chaperone in sight, and the crowd's torn between awe and scandal. You grip the ropes, feeling the basket sway as your own balloon climbs. Women like her are why you're up here, inspired by their audacity in a city that loves rules almost as much as romance. Let's talk about Sophie Blanchard, the rock star of female balloonists. You picture her in 1805, a petite widow who turned ballooning into high art. She was Napoleon's favorite, performing daring ascents with fireworks trailing from her basket. Fireworks! You smirk, imagining the sparks raining down while Paris gasped. But the law wasn't kind. That chaperone rule meant Sophie often had to drag along a male assistant, who was less help than dead weight. She ditched him whenever she could, proving her skill solo. You feel a surge of respect. She wasn't just floating, she was fighting a system that wanted her on the ground. Then there's Elizabeth Theobald, who beat Sophie to the skies back in 1784. You imagine her, a lion opera singer, becoming the first woman to balloon, floating over France in a frilly dress like it was just another Tuesday. Paris's later laws didn't exist yet, but the social barriers were real. Women weren't supposed to risk their lives for science or spectacle. Elizabeth didn't care, she soared, and her flight inspired others. You glance at Madame Du Bois's balloon, wondering if she's channeling that same defiance. The law might demand a chaperone, but up here, the wind's the only boss. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk ripples above, catching the sunset like a glowing sail. The burner's heat warms your cheeks, and the basket creaks with every gust. Below, the crowd's noise swells, cheers, gasps, and the occasional heckler shouting about proper ladies. Male, you spot a woman in a bonnet waving at Madame Du Bois, her face lit with pride. The air carries the scent of dust and excitement, and you feel the balloon's gentle sway, like a cradle rocked by the sky. You're not just watching history, you're part of it, floating in a world where women are rewriting the rules, hunting for a new fight. The chaperone rule was a joke to women like Sophie. You picture her landing after a solo flight, a magistrate waiting with a fine for unchaperoned ascent. She'd probably offer him that champagne bottle you're still clutching from earlier flights, flashing a smile that said, "Catch me in the sky." The law was enforced spottily. Officials were too dazzled or embarrassed to crack down hard. But it lingered, a reminder that Paris wanted its women grounded, even as they soared. The vibe up here is electric. The wind hums, carrying the faint jingle of bells from a distant church. Your balloon feels like a rebel's hideout, a place where rules bend. You lean over the basket, watching Madame Du Bois's balloon climb higher. Somewhere below, officials are scribbling new laws, but they can't touch her now. You grip the ropes, inspired by her nerve. Paris loves its balloons, but it's women like her who make the sky truly free. Section 9. You're still swaying in your wicker basket, the balloon drifting over Paris as twilight creeps in, brushing the city with shades of violet and gold. The air's sharp, carrying the scent of damp cobblestones and faint perfume from the boulevards below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky poet with a penchant for grumbling, tweaks the burner, sending a soft whoosh of heat into the silk canopy. It's the 1830s, and you're soaring through a world where ballooning's a thrill, a spectacle, and a bureaucratic minefield. Remember those daring women like Sophie Blanchard, dodging chaperone rules with a wink? Now, let's dive into another bizarre law, Paris's attempt to dictate what you wear in the sky. That's right, there's a dress code for ballooning, and it's as fussy as a tailor with a vendetta. The mainstream fact is clear. By the late 1830s, Paris introduced regulations requiring balloonists to wear appropriate attire during flights, ostensibly for safety but mostly to maintain the city's polished image. Ballooning was a public spectacle, and the municipal council wanted you looking like a proper ambassador of French flair, not a windswept scarecrow. Picture yourself standing in a field, a clerk inspecting your coat for loose buttons while your balloon tugs at its ropes. You're not just a pilot now, you're a fashion plate, whether you like it or not. Here's the quirky tidbit. The law vaguely banned flammable fabrics, but also frowned on indecent clothing, which for women meant anything too revealing or masculine. Trousers? Scandalous. You chuckle, imagining yourself in a frilly bonnet and fireproof petticoats, trying to look dignified while wrestling with ropes. Historians still argue whether this dress code was about preventing fires or just Paris flexing its sartorial snobbery. Either way, you're about to navigate a law that's as much about style as survival. Set the scene. You're floating over the Marais now, its narrow streets packed with tailor shops and cafes. The air smells of fresh linen and espresso, and the basket creaks as you lean to peer below. Your pilot's in his usual frayed coat, which you're pretty sure breaks the dress code. You glance at your own outfit, let's say a sturdy jacket and boots, practical but maybe not Parisian enough. The law says you need secure, non-flammable clothing, ideally a fitted coat and hat that won't fly off mid-flight. For women, it's even stricter. Long skirts, no loose shawls, and definitely no trousers, even if they're safer. You smirk, picturing Sophie Blanchard from last section, probably tying her scarf extra tight to mock the rules. The dress code wasn't just about safety, it was about optics. Balloonists were celebrities, ogled by crowds who expected a show. Paris wanted you to look the part, like a sky-born diplomat in a top hat or a lady in a velvet cape. The flammable fabrics rule made sense. Burners are fiery, and a stray spark could turn your silk cravat into a torch. But the vagueness was maddening. What counted as flammable? Wool. Cotton. You imagine a balloonist arguing with an official, holding up a sleeve. This is linen, monsieur, it's practically stone. The fines for dress code violations weren't huge, think a day's wages for a baker, but they stung, especially if you were already dodging fines for reckless drifts or missing landing flags. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its colors fading into the dusk like a watercolor. The burner's heat warms your face, a cozy contrast to the chilly breeze tugging at your coat. Below, Paris sparkles, gas lamps flicker, a street vendor's cart rattles, and a woman in a feathered hat waves at your balloon. You adjust your scarf, wondering if it's secure enough for the law. The basket sways, and you grip the ropes, feeling the hemp's rough bite. You're dressed for the sky, but Paris is judging you from the ground. The gendered angle of the dress code was particularly absurd. Women balloonists, already fighting chaperone rules, now had to navigate fashion police in the sky. Trousers were practical, easier to climb ropes or scramble out of a basket, but the law saw them as immodest. You picture a female pilot, maybe Madame Du Bois from earlier, defiantly wearing breeches under her skirt, daring officials to fine her. Men weren't off the hook either. Loose coats or dangling scarves could snag on ropes, so the law favored fitted jackets. Your pilot's coat, with its flapping hem, is definitely illegal. You grin, wondering if he's got a spare hidden in the basket. The vibe up here is still magical, though. The wind hums, carrying the faint clink of wine glasses from a cafe below. Your balloon feels like a floating stage, where you're both performer and rule breaker. You lean over the basket, watching the city's lights wink like stars. Somewhere down there, a clerk's ready to fine you for an untucked shirt, but you're too high to care. You spot another balloon in the distance, its green silk glowing faintly. Are they dressed to code, or are they rebels like you? You're not sure, but you're starting to love the defiance of it all. Your pilot catches your grin and shrugs. They can't measure my cuffs up here, he jokes, and you laugh. The dress code's a hassle, but it's also a badge of the balloonist's life. part science, part spectacle, and all Paris. You tug your coat tighter, ready for the next gust. The sky's yours, even if your wardrobe's under scrutiny. You're still gliding in your wicker basket, the balloon floating over Paris as the city's lights begin to twinkle in the deepening dusk. The air's chilly, with a faint whiff of coal smoke and roasted chestnuts drifting up from the streets below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky nomad, tweaks the burner with a soft whoosh, keeping the silk canopy plump above you. It's the 1830s, and you're navigating a maze of ballooning laws. Those dress code fusses and women defying chaperones are still buzzing in your mind. Now, let's dive into a rule that's downright bizarre: Paris's ban on animal passengers in balloons. Forget your dreams of soaring with a pet parrot. This law's here to keep the skies fur-free, and it's as odd as it sounds. The mainstream fact is straightforward. By the late 1830s, Paris outlawed carrying animals in balloons, citing safety risks and public complaints. Animals had been part of ballooning's early days. Remember the Montgolfier brothers' sheep, duck, and rooster joyride back in 1783? But by your time, the cities had enough of dogs barking from baskets or cats freaking out at 1,000 feet. Picture yourself trying to sneak a puppy aboard, only to face a stern official wagging his finger. You're not just a balloonist now, you're a potential pet smuggler, and Paris is watching. Here's the quirky tidbit: the ban wasn't just about safety. It was partly sparked by a 1836 incident where a balloonist's pet monkey escaped mid-flight and terrorized a village. Terrorized how? Nobody's sure, but you imagine a tiny primate parachuting into a bakery, stealing croissants while villagers screamed. Historians still argue whether this monkey tale was real or just a colorful excuse to tighten the rules. Either way, you're about to learn why your balloon's a no-pets zone, and it's a wild ride. Set the scene. You're floating over the Seine now, its waters reflecting the first stars like a liquid mirror. The air smells of river mud and distant lavender, and the basket creaks as you shift to peer below. Your pilot's muttering about landing soon, probably to avoid that night flight ban you laughed about earlier. You pat your pocket, half wishing you'd smuggled a kitten for company, but the law's clear: no animals allowed. You glance at the empty basket corner, picturing a dog curled up, oblivious to the view. The crowd below, gathered on a bridge, points at your balloon's yellow silk, their cheers faint but lively. They don't know you're petless, thanks to Paris's oddest rule yet. The animal ban came from a mix of chaos and caution. Early balloonists loved bringing pets: dogs for morale, cats for luck, even a parrot or two for showmanship. You picture a pilot with a cockatoo on his shoulder, squawking at the crowd like a feathered hype man. But animals weren't great at altitude. Dogs barked at clouds, cats clawed the ropes, and one story claims a rabbit chewed through a ballast bag, sending a balloon into a spin. You smirk, imagining the poor pilot tossing carrots overboard to calm his bunny. The city's response? A blanket ban. No pets, no exceptions, with fines up to 100 francs if you got caught. The monkey incident was the law's origin story, or so the gossip goes. You imagine the scene: a balloonist, probably a showman, takes his pet monkey aloft for a stunt. Mid-flight, the monkey panics, leaps from the basket, and lands in a village, where it allegedly runs amok, knocking over market stalls and scaring horses. The villagers, already jittery about balloons, demand action. True or not, the story gave Paris an excuse to crack down. You laugh softly, picturing that monkey now, retired in a barn, telling tales of its skyward adventure. The law also cited safety: animals could distract pilots or damage equipment. A dog in a panic might knock over the burner, and nobody wants a mid-air barbecue. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its folds catching the twilight like a glowing curtain. The burner's heat warms your hands, and the basket sways, creaking like an old rocking chair. Below, Paris hums, barges chug along the Seine, a street fiddler plays a slow tune, and a kid shouts, waving at your balloon. You feel the wind's gentle tug, carrying the faint scent of wet wool from a nearby dock. You're petless per the law, but you can't help imagining a purring cat in the basket, unimpressed by the view. The vibe up here is serene but tinged with rebellion. You lean over the basket, watching the city's lights flicker like fireflies. Somewhere below, officials are ready to fine you for a stray hamster, but you're too high to care. Your pilot grins, catching your daydream. No monkeys for us, he jokes, and you nod, remembering that champagne bottle you've been clutching since the first flight. Maybe you'd bribe an official with it if you got caught with a pet. The law's a hassle, but it's part of the balloonist's life, dodging rules while chasing the sky. You spot another balloon in the distance, its blue silk fading into the dusk. Are they pet-free, or are they hiding a rebellious goldfish? You're not sure, but you're starting to love the absurdity of it all. Paris wants its skies orderly, but you're a balloonist, order's not your style. You grip the ropes, ready for the next gust, petless but free. You're still floating in your wicker basket, the balloon drifting over Paris as the city's gas lamps glow like scattered embers in the twilight. The air's crisp, with a faint whiff of baking bread and river dampness curling up from below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky wrangler, adjusts the burner with a soft whoosh, keeping the silk canopy taut above you. It's the 1830s, and you're soaring through a tangle of ballooning laws. Those pet bans and dress code dramas are still tickling your mind. Now, let's dive into a new quirk, Paris's rules against balloonists using the sky for advertising. Picture yourself tempted to drop leaflets or hoist a banner, only to realize the city's ready to fine you for turning your balloon into a floating billboard. This one's a doozy. The mainstream fact is clear. By the late 1830s, Paris cracked down on balloonists using flights for commercial promotions, banning leaflets, banners, or any public displays from the sky. Ballooning was a spectacle, and entrepreneurs saw dollar signs. Why not advertise a tavern or a tailor from 1,000 feet? But the municipal council, ever the guardian of Parisian dignity, saw this as tacky and dangerous. Imagine yourself caught mid-flight, a stack of flyers in hand, while a clerk on the ground scribbles your fine. You're not just a balloonist now, you're a potential sky spammer, and Paris wants your message grounded. Here's the quirky tidbit. One balloonist in 1837 reportedly dropped thousands of candy wrappers with his bakery's name printed on them, causing a minor riot as kids scrambled for sweets. The city wasn't amused, wrappers littered the streets, and the stunt led to a blanket ban on aerial ads. You chuckle, picturing yourself raining peppermint twists over Paris, only to face a magistrate's glare. Historians still argue whether this candy caper was the ban's true spark or just a colorful tale to justify more rules. Either way, you're about to learn why your balloon's no place for a sales pitch. Set the scene. You're floating over the Latin Quarter now, its crooked streets alive with students and flickering lanterns. The air smells of ink and mulled wine, and the basket creaks as you lean to peer below. Your pilot's muttering about landing soon, probably to dodge that night flight ban you smirked about earlier. You spot a tavern sign below, its painted mug tempting you to advertise something. Maybe that champagne bottle you've been clutching since your first flight, now a running joke. But the law's clear, no promotions from the sky. The crowd below waves, their cheers a distant hum, unaware you're wrestling with the urge to drop a flyer that says, "Best baguettes in Paris." The advertising ban was Paris's response to balloonists turning flights into marketing stunts. Early on, some pilots saw the sky as a blank canvas. You picture a balloonist in 1835, dangling a banner for a hat shop, Chapeaux Pierre, finest in France. The crowd loved it, but the city didn't. Banners added weight, messed with balance, and sometimes tore free, raining fabric on unsuspecting Parisians. Leaflets were worse. Fluttering papers caused chaos, spooked horses, and clogged gutters. The candy wrapper incident was the final straw. You imagine kids diving for sweets while shopkeepers cursed the mess. The fine for aerial ads? Up to 150 francs, enough to make you rethink your marketing career. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its folds catching the last light like a glowing sail. The burner's heat warms your hands, and the basket sways, creaking with every gust. Below, Paris pulses, students laugh outside a cafe, a cart's wheels rattle, and a stray cat darts across a rooftop. You feel the wind's tug, carrying the faint scent of wax from a chandlery. You're tempted to toss a flyer, just to see how far it'd float, but the law's got you tethered. You glance at your pilot, wondering if he's ever been tempted to advertise his cousin's tavern. He catches your look and shrugs. "Skies for flying, not selling," he jokes, and you grin. The ban wasn't just about litter, It was about image. Ballooning was France's pride, a symbol of science and elegance. Paris didn't want it cheapened by flying billboards. You picture a snooty official muttering, "Balloons are for poetry, not pastries." The law also aimed to protect crowds. Falling banners could hurt someone, and leaflets stirred up mobs. Enforcement was tricky, though. How do you catch a balloonist dropping flyers mid-flight? You laugh, imagining a constable on a rooftop, waving a net like he's hunting butterflies. Spotty or not, the fines kept most balloonists in line. The vibe up here is still dreamy, though. The wind hums, carrying the faint clink of glasses from a bistro below. Your balloon feels like a floating sanctuary, free from the city's fuss, almost. You lean over the basket, watching the Latin Quarter's lights twinkle. Somewhere below, officials are ready to fine you for a stray pamphlet, but you're too high to care. You spot another balloon in the distance, its red silk fading into the dusk. Are they plotting a sneaky ad drop, or are they playing by the rules? You're not sure, but you love the rebellion of it all. You grip the ropes, ready for the next gust, your champagne bottle still unadvertised. Section 12. You're still aloft in your wicker basket, the balloon drifting over Paris as the city's rooftops fade into the deepening twilight. The air's sharp, with a faint scent of wet stone and distant wood smoke curling up from below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky wanderer, tweaks the burner with a soft whoosh, keeping the silk canopy taut above you. It's the 1830s, and you're soaring through a world of ballooning laws. Those bans on skyborne ads and pet passengers still tickle your mind. Now, let's dive into a darker corner of the rulebook, the military's crackdown on civilian balloons. Paris's army isn't just watching the skies for enemies, they're watching you, and their fears are reshaping the laws. Get ready to feel the weight of national security on your high-flying dreams. The mainstream fact is clear. By the late 1830s, the French military pushed for stricter ballooning regulations, worried that civilian flights could interfere with defense or even aid espionage. Balloons weren't just toys, they were potential tools for war, capable of scouting enemy lines or dropping messages. The army, still twitchy from decades of revolutions and invasions, didn't trust random balloonists floating over forts or barracks. Picture yourself hauled before a grim-faced colonel, your balloon tethered outside, while he demands to know why you drifted near a garrison. You're not just a sky poet now, you're a potential spy, at least in the army's eyes. Here's the quirky tidbit. One regulation banned balloonists from carrying optical instruments like telescopes, supposedly to prevent spying, but it led to absurd debates about what counted as a spy tool. A pair of opera glasses? Suspicious. You chuckle, imagining yourself pleading, "But I just wanted to admire the cathedral," to a skeptical officer. Historians still argue whether these rules were about real threats or just military paranoia overreaching into civilian life. Either way, you're about to learn why your balloon's caught in the crosshairs of France's defense obsession. Set the scene. You're floating over the edges of Paris now, where the city's bustle gives way to forts and grassy embankments. The air smells of dew and gunpowder, a faint reminder of the military presence below. Your pilot scanning for a landing spot, muttering about clearance zones near army posts. The basket creaks as you lean to peer down, spotting a stone fortress with soldiers milling like ants. Your balloon's bright green silk feels like a beacon, drawing eyes from the ground. You grip the ropes, wondering if that champagne bottle you've been toting since the first flight could bribe a soldier to look the other way. The crowd's gone now, you're too far from the city's heart for spectators, but the army's watching, and they're not here for the show. The military crackdown started with real concerns. Balloons could float high, see far, and move silently, perfect for spying. You picture a rogue balloonist in 1838, drifting over a fort, sketching cannon placements for some foreign agent. The army wasn't paranoid without reason. Napoleon had used balloons for reconnaissance, and other nations were experimenting too. The law banned flights over strategic sites, forts, arsenals, even shipyards along the Seine. Fines for violations were brutal, up to 500 francs, enough to bankrupt a small-time balloonist. You smirk, imagining your pilot muttering, "The wind's not a spy, monsieur," to a red-faced general. The telescope ban was where things got weird. Optical instruments could help a balloonist map defenses, sure, but the rule was absurdly broad. Some officials argued any lens, binoculars, magnifying glasses, made you a suspect. You laugh softly, picturing a balloonist caught with a monocle, insisting it's for reading poetry mid-flight. The law also required you to report your flight path in advance, which, as you've learned, is hilarious when balloons go where the wind pleases. You imagine submitting a plan, probably not over the fort, unless the breeze feels patriotic. Enforcement was spotty. Soldiers couldn't exactly chase you into the clouds, but a single complaint from a fort's commander could ground you for months. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its folds catching the last light like a glowing emerald. The burner's heat warms your face, and the basket sways, creaking with every gust. Below, the fort's quiet but ominous. Torches flicker, a bugle sounds faintly, and a soldier's bayonet glints. The air carries the scent of damp grass and oiled leather, a military tang. You feel exposed, like a moth under a lantern. Your pilot's tense, steering clear of the fort's airspace, but the wind's not cooperating. You're not spying, but try telling that to the army. The vibe up here is thrilling but uneasy. The wind hums, carrying the faint clank of metal from the fort. Your balloon feels like a trespasser, dodging invisible borders in the sky. You lean over the basket, watching the city's edge blur into fields. Somewhere below, officers are scanning the horizon, ready to slap you with a fine for drifting too close. You spot another balloon in the distance, its blue silk barely visible. Are they dodging forts too, or are they blissfully unaware? You're not sure, but you're starting to feel the army's shadow. You grip the ropes, your champagne bottle still unopened, a small rebellion against the rules piling up. Section 13. You're still drifting in your wicker basket, the balloon swaying gently over the outskirts of Paris as the night sky deepens, speckled with stars like spilled sugar. The air's cold, with a faint whiff of damp earth and pine from the fields below. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky shepherd, tweaks the burner with a soft whoosh, casting a warm glow across the silk canopy. It's the 1830s, and you're tangled in the ever-tightening net of ballooning laws. Those military crackdowns and telescope bans still linger in your mind. Now, let's explore a new chapter. The legal battles over balloons that crashed in Paris's suburbs. When your balloon goes astray and lands in a farmer's field or a village square, the law's ready to pounce, and the fights that follow are as messy as a spilled barrel of wine. The mainstream fact is clear. By the late 1830s, Paris saw a surge in lawsuits and fines tied to balloon crashes in suburban areas, as landowners and villagers demanded compensation for damaged crops, frightened livestock, or just plain annoyance. Balloons didn't always land gracefully. Sometimes they plowed through fences or flattened wheat fields, leaving balloonists to face angry locals and sharp-eyed magistrates. Picture yourself dusting off your coat after a bumpy landing, a farmer waving a broken rake while a clerk tallies your fine. You're not just a sky wanderer now, you're a defendant in Paris's pettiest courtroom dramas. Here's the quirky tidbit. One law allowed fines based on the emotional distress caused by a crash, meaning a villager could claim your balloon's arrival ruined their day. Emotional distress? From a balloon? You chuckle, imagining a farmer sobbing over his trampled turnips, demanding payment for his shattered peace. Historians still argue whether these distress claims were legitimate or just a way for locals to milk balloonists for cash. Either way, you're about to wade into the legal quagmire of suburban crash sites, where every landing's a potential lawsuit. Set the scene. You're floating over a patchwork of fields and hamlets just beyond Paris, where the city's glow fades into rural darkness. The air smells of hay and cow dung, and the basket creaks as you peer below. Your pilot's muttering about wind shifts, eyeing a meadow for a landing. The burner's glow lights his face, and you grip the ropes, bracing for impact. You're carrying that champagne bottle from your first flight, still unopened, ready to appease any furious farmers. Below, a village stirs, lanterns bob, dogs bark, and a few curious souls step out to watch your balloon's red silk descend. You're not aiming to crash, but balloons don't always cooperate, and the law's waiting if you do. Crashes were a fact of ballooning life. You picture a typical mishap. Your balloon catches a gust, misses the meadow, and skids into a barley field, snapping stalks like matchsticks. The farmer's livid, his wife's shouting about her startled hens, and a kid's already stealing a rope as a souvenir. The law let locals file claims for damages, crops, fences, even livestock that bolted in panic. Fines ranged from 20 to 200 francs, depending on the mess. But the emotional distress clause was the real wild card. One 1838 case saw a villager win 50 francs because a balloon's crash disrupted his Sunday nap. You smirk, picturing yourself offering that champagne bottle to calm his nerves. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its folds catching starlight like a glowing ruby. The burner's heat warms your hands, and the basket sways, creaking with every breeze. Below, the village is alive. Cows low, a shutters rattle, and a lone fiddler plays in a tavern. You feel the wind's tug, carrying the scent of fresh-turned soil. As you descend, the ground rushes up, and the basket thuds into a field, kicking up dust. The farmer's already charging toward you, his lantern swinging like a tiny sun. You wave the champagne, hoping it's worth more than a fine. The legal battles were a circus. Balloonists argued the wind was to blame, not them. You imagine yourself in a cramped village courtroom, facing a magistrate who looks like he'd rather be fishing. "The breeze, monsieur, it's a rogue," you plead, but the farmer's got witnesses, his wife, his cousin, even the village drunk, claiming your crash caused chaos. The distress clause let locals exaggerate, turning minor incidents into cash grabs. Some balloonists fought back, hiring lawyers to argue force majeure, but most paid up to avoid the hassle. You laugh softly, picturing your pilot muttering, "Next time, we land in the Seine." The vibe down here is tense but oddly comical. The farmer's yelling, but he's eyeing the champagne. The village kids are circling, hoping for a piece of silk. You're grounded, surrounded by the law's petty grip, but the sky's still calling. You spot another balloon in the distance, its yellow silk sinking toward another field. Are they braced for a lawsuit too? You're not sure, but you're starting to see the pattern. Every flight's a gamble, every landing a legal minefield. You grip the ropes, ready to climb back into the air, where the law's reach feels just a little weaker. You're back in the air, your wicker basket swaying as the balloon drifts over Paris's sprawling suburbs, where fields and villages blur into the city's hazy glow. The night air's cool, with a faint scent of clover and distant chimney smoke tickling your nose. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky rogue, adjusts the burner with a soft whoosh, bathing the silk canopy in a warm flicker. It's the 1830s, and you're soaring through a world of ballooning laws. Those suburban crash lawsuits and emotional distress claims still dance in your mind. Now, let's plunge into the chaos of Paris's balloon festivals, where every rule you've learned gets tossed out like yesterday's baguette. These events were lawless carnivals of silk and spectacle, and you're about to see why they drove the city up the wall. The mainstream fact is solid. By the late 1830s, Paris's balloon festivals, mass launches held in places like the Champ de Mars, became so chaotic that they routinely broke every regulation, from night flight bans to advertising rules. These weren't quaint fairs, they were aerial free-for-alls, with dozens of balloons, thousands of spectators, and enough rule-breaking to make a magistrate faint. Picture yourself in a basket, surrounded by a flotilla of colorful orbs, while the crowd below roars like a storm. You're not just a balloonist now, you're a performer in Paris's wildest show, and the law's struggling to keep up. Here's the quirky tidbit. One festival in 1839 saw a balloonist drop a live piglet in a tiny parachute, defying the animal ban and sparking a riot as spectators fought over the flying pork. A piglet parachute? You chuckle, imagining the poor swine squealing its way to fame. Historians still argue whether this stunt was a deliberate middle finger to the rules or just a showman's desperate bid for attention. Either way, you're about to dive into the lawless madness of balloon festivals, where every ascent was a rebellion. Set the scene. You're floating over the Champ de Mars, the festival's heart, where a sea of balloons, red, blue, gold, bobs like a floating rainbow. The air smells of gunpowder from fireworks and spilled cider from vendors. Your pilot's grinning, caught up in the chaos, as he steers through a sky thick with silk. The basket creaks, and you grip the ropes, your champagne bottle, still unopened from that first flight, tucked safely away. Below, the crowd's a writhing mass. Top hats, bonnets, kids on shoulders, all screaming as balloons launch. You spot a pilot nearby, waving a banner for a soap shop, clearly ignoring the ad ban you laughed about earlier. Rules. What rules? This is a festival, and Paris's laws are just suggestions tonight. Festivals were ballooning's Super Bowl, drawing thousands to watch mass ascents, races, and stunts. You picture the scene, dozens of balloons inflating at once, burners roaring, ropes snapping taut. The crowd's electric, betting on which balloon will crash first or climb highest. But the chaos broke every law in the book. Night flights. Half the balloons stayed up past dusk, their burners glowing like rogue stars. Advertising. Banners and leaflets rained down, promoting everything from wine to wigs. Animal bans? You smirk, picturing that piglet parachuting into history. Even the dress code was ignored. Pilots wore gaudy costumes, from pirate hats to fake royal robes, mocking the appropriate attire rule. The city tried to regulate festivals, but it was like herding cats in a windstorm. One law required organizers to get permits, but enforcement was a joke. Too many balloons, too little manpower. Fines were slapped on pilots after the fact, but most paid up and kept flying. You imagine a magistrate at the festival's edge, shaking his fist as a balloon drops candy wrappers, echoing that bakery stunt from earlier. The piglet incident was a low point. Officials claimed it endangered public safety, but the crowd loved it, chasing the parachuting porker like it was a golden goose. You laugh softly, wishing you'd seen that swine's grand descent. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums above, its folds catching fireworks sparks like a glowing tapestry. The burner's heat warms your face, and the basket sways, creaking in the crowded sky. Below, the festival roars, drums thump, a brass band blares, and vendors shout about hot pies. The air carries the scent of sulfur and sugar, a festival cocktail. You feel the chaos, your balloon bumping air currents as others jostle nearby. A pilot in a neighboring basket waves, his fake crown glinting. You wave back, feeling like part of the rebellion. The vibe is pure anarchy, but it's thrilling. You lean over the basket, watching the crowd surge like a tide. Somewhere below, officials are scribbling fines, but they're drowned out by the festival's pulse. You spot another balloon, its purple silk trailing a forbidden banner, cheapest ale in Paris. You grin, loving the defiance. Your pilot nudges you, pointing at a firework bursting below. They can't fine us all, he jokes, and you nod, clutching your champagne bottle. Festivals are where balloonists shine, rules be damned. Paris loves the spectacle, even if it hates the mess. Section 15. You're still swaying in your wicker basket, the balloon drifting high above Paris as the night sky wraps the city in a velvet hush. The air's cold, with a soft scent of dew and distant lavender settling around you. Your pilot, that mustachioed sky dreamer, eases the burner with a gentle whoosh, the silk canopy glowing faintly above. It's the late 1830s, and you've soared through a gauntlet of ballooning laws, from festival chaos to piglet parachutes, each rule a thread tying your freedom to the ground. Now, let's drift into the twilight of Paris's ballooning craze, where tightening laws and fading dreams slowly ground the city's skyward obsession. You're about to see why the balloons that once lit up Paris began to fade, leaving only whispers in the wind. The mainstream fact is clear. By the early 1840s, Paris's ballooning regulations grew so strict, piling on fines, licenses and bans, that they choked the life out of the civilian ballooning boom. What started as a symbol of French ingenuity became a bureaucratic burden, with costs and restrictions driving all but the wealthiest or most stubborn pilots to the ground. Picture yourself grounded, your balloon folded in a barn, while a clerk hands you a stack of permits you can't afford. You're not just a balloonist now, you're a relic of a fading era, watching the skies empty. Here's the quirky tidbit. One final law required balloonists to carry emergency candles to signal distress, a poetic but impractical nod to the romance of flight. Candles. In a flammable basket? You chuckle, imagining yourself lighting a wick while the wind laughs. Historians still argue whether this rule was a sincere safety measure or just Paris's way of burying ballooning in absurdity. Either way, you're about to drift through the decline of a dream, where the city's love for control outshone its love for the sky. Set the scene. You're floating over the city's edge, where Paris blends into quiet fields and sleeping villages. The air's still, the burners glow a soft pulse in the dark. Your pilot's silent now, his usual mutters replaced by a wistful stare at the horizon. The basket creaks, and you grip the ropes, your champagne bottle, still unopened from that first flight, tucked against your side. Below, Paris is a sea of faint lights, its gas lamps like stars fallen to earth. You spot no other balloons tonight. The skies feel lonely, as if the city's rules have scared the others away. The festival chaos you reveled in last time is a memory, replaced by a quiet that feels both peaceful and heavy. The decline started slowly. You picture the early 1840s, when every flight meant navigating a maze of laws, licenses, dress codes, no animals, no ads, no night flights, no drifting over forts. Each rule added weight, fines drained wallets, permits took time, and the military's paranoia made every launch feel like a gamble. Ballooning was expensive, silk, burners, and repairs cost a fortune, and the fines for breaking rules, like those 500-franc military violations, could ruin you. You imagine a pilot like your own, selling his balloon to pay a crash fine, his dreams folded with the silk. The festivals dwindled too. Too many fights, too many lawsuits, and that piglet parachute didn't help. Paris wanted order, and ballooning was anything but. The candle rule was a final, absurd flourish. You picture yourself holding a flickering flame, hoping a farmer spots your distress signal before your basket catches fire. The law was meant to help stranded balloonists, but it felt like a metaphor, a dim light in a darkening era. Ballooning didn't vanish. Militaries and scientists kept experimenting, but the civilian craze faded. You feel a pang, remembering the crowds at the Champ de Mars, the women like Sophie Blanchard defying chaperones, the candy wrappers raining down. Those days are slipping away, grounded by a city that loves rules more than dreams. Let's talk sensory details. The balloon's silk hums softly, its folds catching starlight like a fading ember. The burner's heat is a gentle warmth, and the basket sways, creaking like a lullaby. Below, Paris is quiet. Crickets hum, a dog barks faintly, and the Seine's ripple catches the moon. The air carries the scent of wet grass and distant bread, a reminder of the city you love. You lean over the basket, watching the lights fade into the horizon. The sky feels vast, but empty, as if the other balloons have surrendered to the law. The vibe is bittersweet. You grip the ropes, feeling the hemp's familiar bite. Your pilot's eyes are on the stars, not the city, as if he knows this flight might be one of the last. You clutch that champagne bottle, tempted to open it now, a toast to a dying dream. Paris still sparkles below, but its skies are quieter, its rules heavier. You spot a single balloon in the distance, its faint glow, a stubborn holdout. Are they fighting the laws too? You hope so, but the wind feels like it's carrying you all toward the end. Wind down. And so, you drift, the balloon's gentle sway rocking you like a cradle in the sky. The stars above Paris twinkle, each one a story, a flight, a dream that once lit the city's heart. You feel the cool air, soft as a whisper, brushing your skin, carrying away the weight of laws and fines. The burner's glow fades, its warmth lingering like a memory. Below, Paris sleeps, its rooftops cradling the dreams of those who dared to soar. You're not fighting the rules anymore, you're floating above them, free in this quiet moment. The basket creaks, a soothing hum, and your eyelids grow heavy. Let the wind carry you now, into a place where balloons still dance and the sky knows no bounds. Drift, dear listener, into the hush of night, where Paris's lights fade into dreams. Sleep well, carried by the gentle breath of the stars.